Let's jump right into it. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're tackling the massive, compounding global impacts of the forecasted 2026 Super El Niño. From shifting ocean currents to profound human crises, this is a domino effect we all need to understand to grasp exactly what the next year holds for our planet. 2 to 3 degrees Celsius. Now, that might sound pretty minor if we're just talking about the weather outside your window, but it is a staggering, massive shift when we're talking about ocean heat. This single metric serves as the trigger for a devastating cascade of global events that's going to affect everything from your local weather right down to global food supply chains.
Here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll be moving through the anatomy of an El Niño, global weather disruption, the escalating food crisis, health, HIV and displacement, and finally, anticipatory action.
All right, part 1, the anatomy of an El Niño.
So what actually makes this a super El Niño? Well, an official El Niño only requires a half-degree temperature bump above historical averages, just half a degree. But for 2026, models are predicting a 2 to 3 degree spike. We are talking about an accumulation of heat that is incredibly rare and immensely powerful. The sheer scale of this energy absolutely warrants the title. It's literally the equivalent of millions of atomic bombs worth of heat energy stored underwater. Basically, this is a natural climate pattern where ocean surface temperatures in the central and eastern Pacific get really warm, and that reshapes global weather. But what makes 2026 so unique and honestly so alarming is the sheer speed of it. We are whipping from the cooling phase of La Niña straight into this extreme warming, giving our global systems almost zero time to brace for the whiplash.
Take a look at that deep red band stretching right across the Pacific. That represents a massive pool of heat energy accumulating about 300 meters down, just waiting to disrupt global weather systems. It's essentially an engine of atmospheric chaos, and it is revving up as we speak.
Moving on to part 2, global weather disruption.
And here is the wild paradox of El Niño. This exact same climate trigger acts completely differently depending on where you are. On one hand, it literally starves Central America's dry corridor of water, completely destroying crops. But then, on the flip side, it drowns parts of the southern cone, places like Uruguay, northern Argentina, and southern Brazil, in absolutely torrential floods. It's a brutal dual threat of extremes. When you map out the expected rainfall, you can physically see how standard agricultural cycles are just being completely upended. The green areas are bracing for way too much rain, while the brown areas are looking at severe deficits. When moisture gets redirected like this, farmers are left totally guessing, and those standard, reliable crop yields just plummet.
Which brings us to part 3, the escalating food crisis.
$87.5 million. Let that number sink in for a second. It's a truly staggering figure that we all really need to pause and process. It isn't just a statistic. It represents individuals, families, and entire communities whose livelihoods are on the brink.
We are talking about 87.5 million people thrust into high acute food insecurity simply because the rain either completely stopped or it fell way too hard. According to the latest global reports, weather extremes, driven heavily by El Niño, are the primary driver of this massive hunger crisis across 16 different countries. And look, when agriculture fails on this scale, it doesn't just devastate those local communities. It sends shockwaves through global food supply chains, eventually hitting grocery store shelves and prices for absolutely everyone.
Seeing withered, barren cornfields like these in southern Africa really brings that massive statistic down to earth. It shows the visceral reality of a failed harvest. In places like Zambia and Zimbabwe, communities have watched their maize crops get completely decimated. And when that soil turns to dust, the local economy and the community's food supply just vanish right along with it. Part 4, health, HIV, and displacement.
This is where we see a really tragic domino effect unfold. First, you have crop failure and water scarcity hitting hard. Second, families literally have no choice but to migrate just to survive, leading to mass displacement and a total loss of income. And third, all that sudden movement completely cuts off their access to medical care. It exposes highly vulnerable populations to severe risks, including, horribly, a sharp spike in gender-based violence. To really put this into context, during the last El Niño cycle, between 2023 and 2024, a staggering 61 million people were impacted in southern Africa alone,
And remember, these are communities that already face some of the highest HIV prevalence rates in the entire world. So when a massive climate shock hits here, we aren't just talking about a threat to nutrition. It threatens the entire public health infrastructure.
And here is a heartbreaking biological reality about HIV treatment. You physically cannot take strong antiretroviral medication on an empty stomach without suffering severe side effects, which means a drought directly forces people to skip their life-saving meds, and that, of course, causes a direct spike in viral loads and disease progression. On top of that, the total collapse of household income creates this high-stress pressure cooker. Notice the data here. Food insecurity is associated with double the odds of violence against women and girls. As they're forced to travel much farther to find water or migrate for work, the risks of exploitation and abuse just skyrocket.
Finally, Part 5. Anticipatory action.
But there is some good news here. We are seeing a crucial evolution in how the world responds. Back in the devastating 2015 cycle, our responses were almost entirely reactive. By 2023, though, humanitarian agencies started adapting, doing things like dispensing multi-month supplies of HIV medications. Now, looking ahead to 2026, the goal is fully proactive early warning protocols. We want to trigger immediate emergency funding well before the worst impacts actually hit. And we know what strategies actually work. Activating early action protocols, giving patients those multi-month supplies of meds before a flood washes out the roads to the clinic, and deploying mobile outreach units directly to displaced folks. By integrating these specific tactics, we can build a really solid, resilient shield against these extreme weather events. This is exactly how we have to adapt healthcare to a rapidly changing climate.
Of course, none of this is possible without incredibly precise data. Constant monitoring from groups like the World Meteorological Organization gives us the critical lead time we need to actually set these life-saving adaptations into motion. In this context, accurate, timely climate data is quite literally a lifesaver.
So I want to leave you with a pressing question to chew on. As ocean temperatures continue to rise, are our global preparedness systems moving fast enough to protect the most vulnerable among us? Because understanding the science of an El Niño, the shifting winds, the warming waters, that's really only half the battle. The true test is our humanity in how we respond to it, our foresight, and our absolute willingness to act before the storm hits. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning and keep learning.